The fix no one expected. The change that made America's flying fortress deadlier wasn't a bigger gun. It was shifting a window. May 29th, 1943, RAF Alconbury, England. Dawn is cool. The concrete still damp. 7 YB-40 gunship variants sit wingtip to wingtip. Crew chiefs move fast under the bellies. Gunners check feed chutes and charging handles. These ships bristle with 50 caliber M2 Brownings. More barrels than a standard fortress. More armor. More hope. They are the stopgap answer to a brutal question. How do you keep bombers alive without long-range escorts? The 8th Air Force is bleeding over Europe. Analysts in early 1943 estimate a B-17 averages about 11 missions before loss. A tour is 25. Do the math. The odds favor the ground crews with paint and rags, not the men who climb the ladder. Doctrine said massed formations could defend themselves. That was the pre-war promise. Box formations, interlocking arcs of fire, precision at noon, over target, in daylight. Reality disagreed. Luftwaffe pilots in Bf-109s and FW-190s learned the seams. They hit from the beam. They rolled through blind spots. They made the formation turn into itself. The worst seam was inside the airplane, not on the outside, not in armor thickness or engine power, inside. In the B-17E and F, 2 waist gunners stood across from each other. They faced open rectangles cut into the fuselage, about 2 feet by 3. The space between them narrowed toward the tail. The aisle was tight. The ship flexed in turbulence. Both men wore sheepskin. Flak vests, parachute harnesses, and oxygen each held a swinging 50 on a pintle. Now set the scene at altitude 25,000 feet, around 7,600 meters. Temperatures can fall to 60° F, 51° C. The slipstream claws through those open windows, 200 miles per hour of freezing air. It finds every gap and seam. It turns sweat to ice crystals. It numbs fingers through silk liners, wool gloves, leather shells, and heated mitts. Fighters come in from 3 o'clock and 9. The waist gunners pivot hard. They fight the wind and the airplane's motion. They fight each other's elbows and ammo cans. Oxygen lines snag. Bayonets on feed belts catch. A stumble becomes a collision. A collision becomes a blind second. A blind second is the only second an attacker needs. Crews wrote it up after missions. Mutual interference. Guns that should have been roaring fell silent at the wrong moment, not because men lacked courage, because the layout asked 2 people to occupy the same air. The human factor's failure multiplied everything else cold. Fear, fatigue into missed shots and dead zones. By the spring of 1943, the pattern is clear. Records suggest beam attacks are producing outsized damage. Waist guns are not doing enough work. The fix is not another turret. The fix is freedom to move. Back on the hard stand, the YB-40s look like a cure. Extra dorsal turret over the radio room, a chin turret added up front, twin mounts at the waist, 11,000 rounds on board, armor plates where flesh is most exposed. On paper, the formation should be a hedgehog, but paper doesn't slip on a frozen floor. Paper doesn't breathe oxygen through a line that just got kicked loose. A veteran gunner explains it in simple terms. I can't swing if he's in my arc. He can't swing if I'm in his. The 2 men mirror each other's panic. They also mirror each other's block. The more they try to help, the tighter the trap. Losses are no longer numbers on a chalkboard. They are empty bunks in Nyssen, huts across East Anglia. They are names on foot lockers shipped home. Replacement crews arrive with fresh flight suits and practice checklists. They do not arrive with scar tissue, the kind of knowledge you only get after you solve a problem you didn't know you had. That knowledge begins to harden now. Operational research officers collect crew debriefs. Engineers at Wright Field collect dimensions, angles, and photographs, Modification centers listen for the same complaint in different words. The answer starts to form: separate the men, stagger the windows, give each gunner his own lane and his own field of fire, enclose the opening with plexiglass, cut the wind, keep the oxygen flowing, keep hands warm enough to clear a jam. But we are not there yet. On this May morning, the YB-40s are taxiing. The lead ship lifts and retracts the gear. The gunships will go with a standard group to Saint-Nazaire. They will try to stay with the formation after the bomb bay doors open and the weight disappears from the others. They will try to be a moving shield. Here's the paradox. No one expected the step that would make the fortress more lethal was not adding barrels. It was making space for the men who aim them. A small shift of metal. A window moved forward on one side and aft on the other. A human-scale correction to a machine-scale war. That is the story we will trace in this series. How a cockpit note became a factory line change. How a line change became lower loss rates. And how lower loss rates changed strategy. From the North Sea to Berlin. It starts with two gunners in a narrow aisle, fighting the slipstream and each other. It ends with a bomber that finally matches its name. The gunship that couldn't, the YB-40, looked like a fortress with a fortress strapped to it. In practice, it solved the wrong problem. In September 1942, planners greenlit a stopgap-turn standard B-17Fs into heavily armed escorts until true long-range fighters arrived. The gap was real. P-47. Thunderbolts could not follow the bombers deep into Germany. P-51 Mustangs were still maturing. So Lockheed's Vega plant received the brief build a gunship that could stay with the formation from takeoff to target and back. The hardware list was ambitious. A second Sperry dorsal turret over the former radio room, a Bendix chin turret under the nose, twin 50 caliber mounts at each waist window, armor plate around crew stations. The bomb bay no longer carried bombs. It became an ammunition magazine, roughly 11,000 rounds of 50 BMG, on paper. The YB-40 promised a hedgehog of tracers. 13 aircraft reached RAF Alconbury in early May 1943, assigned to the 92nd Bomb Group's 327th Squadron. Training exposed a human factors trap the blueprints had missed. The twin mounts at the waist doubled firepower while having freedom of movement. In drills, gunners clipped elbows, snagged oxygen lines, and fouled feed belts. 2 men, 2 guns, 1 narrow aisle. Combat confirmed the flaw. On 29 May 1943, 7 YB-40s joined 96 standard fortresses to strike the submarine pens at Saint-Nazaire, when the bombers jettisoned bombs and grew light. The gunships did not. Heavier and draggier. YB-40s struggled to hold formation on the way home. Worse, debriefs flagged the same pattern from training waist gunners could not track beam attacks cleanly. Mutual interference returned at the very moment it mattered. Briku. Bax Naumon Lad Stro. 22nd June, over the synthetic rubber works at Hills. 1 YB-40 serial 425735 was lost. Accounts pointed again to compromised waist coverage. By then, leaders recognized this wasn't a bad day or a single crew issue. It was systemic. After-action reports moved fast. Wright Field in Dayton opened a tactical review at Boeing's Plant 2 in Seattle. Chief Engineer Edward C. Eddie Wells pulled a team to isolate root causes. Douglas's Tulsa Modification Center began live aircraft trials, and in Cheyenne. The United Airlines Modification Center stood up to translate combat feedback into fieldable fixes, started testing alternatives. The conclusion would upend assumptions more guns weren't the answer. Space, sightlines, and airflow were. Engineers proposed a fix that felt almost impolite in its simplicity: stagger the waist windows. Slide the left opening forward, shift the right aft by roughly 3 feet, instantly. Each gunner owned a lane, elbows cleared, Feed belts ran straight. Sightlines stopped colliding. The airframe changed little. Combat potential changed a lot. Trial ships with the offset layout went up in early July 1943. Crews reported cleaner tracking and quicker target handoffs along the beam. Jam-inducing tangles dropped to near zero in debriefs. Yet one problem remained unchanged: the weather inside the airplane. Open rectangles still inhaled a 200-mile-per-hour slipstream in Arctic cold. Punishing hands and oxygen hardware. The complete answer paired geometry with shelter. Enclose the staggered positions behind curved plexiglass. Add rotating mounts that let a 50 swing smoothly without dragging belts across a partner's chest. This field-driven package, soon nicknamed the Cheyenne configuration, turned improvised corners into true combat stations. Industry moved fast. Douglas integrated the staggered window on late B-17F production in August 1943. Boeing baked the change into the new B-17G, with the first airframe finished on August 30th. Lockheed Vega followed immediately, and the G was more than fixed waist guns. The Bendix chin turret hardened frontal defense. The tail station gained larger windows and better arcs. Together, these changes made the fortress worthy of its name. Production told the priority. Boeing Seattle built 8 680 B-17Gs, Douglas Long Beach, 2 395, Lockheed Vega, 2,250. Everyone carried staggered waist windows and the broader suite of combat-driven improvements that saved crews and stabilized formations. Proof in the gun camera. By autumn 1943, the change inside the fuselage was showing up where it counted on debrief boards and in formation survival. Combat reports from October tell the first chapter. On 8th October, during strikes against Bremen and Vegasack, B-17Gs with the offset. Enclosed waist stations logged more clean tracking shots along the beam than the older F models. Crews described steadier arcs, fewer fouled belts, and faster handoffs between gun positions. Losses to beam attacks fell exactly the failure mode the redesign targeted. Records suggest the improvement was measurable, not just anecdotal. 6 days later came a trial by fire, 14th October 1943, Black Thursday, during the second Schweinfurt mission. Out of 291 fortresses dispatched, 60 did not return, even in that carnage. Post-mission analysis found a pattern where G models flew. Proportional losses were lower than among F models still in the line. No one argued that staggered waist windows saved the day. But they were part of a broader hardening chin turret up front, refined tail station, tighter fields of fire that helped ships and crews survive the worst air battle of the year. The Luftwaffe noticed. After-action notes from fighter units indicated that American bombers were harder to press from 3 and 9 o'clock. Waist guns delivered steadier, disciplined bursts that tracked attackers through the approach instead of breaking off mid-swing to restore advantage. German units adapted. They fielded the Werfer Granite 21 underwing rocket for standoff shots and deployed heavy Sturmbach assault variants to slug it out at close range. The move to specialized weapons and airframes is itself a data point. The bomber's defensive envelope had changed enough to force new costs on the attacker. By December, the transformation was shaping plans, not just firefights, with survivability up. 8th Air Force planners pushed deeper penetrations with fewer aborts. General Ira Eaker signaled to General Henry Hap Arnold that the cumulative modifications, especially in the waist and nose, were materially improving force endurance over target. Training followed the hardware. Gunnery schools rewrote curricula for the staggered layout. At Kingman, instructors emphasized deflection shooting that the old, colliding waist stations had made impractical. The ripple effect crossed airframes. Late production B-24 Liberators incorporated staggered waists of their own. The B-29, designed on a different scale, took the logic further with remote. Sight-stabilized turrets, no slipstream, no elbow wars, better human factors. January 11, 1944, offered a snapshot of cumulative effect. Roughly 600 B-17s hit aircraft factories in Germany. Escort coverage was incomplete at points along the route. Losses were painful but manageable and, again, disproportionately borne by older F models. The Gs showed what crews called remarkable staying power. The next month, Big Week put the system to a larger test. More than 3,000 bomber sorties struck the Reich's aircraft production network, despite fierce opposition. Overall attrition stayed within sustainable bounds. Better defensive layouts inside the bombers and more coherent escort outside the formation shifted the math. Leadership adapted accordingly. When Lieutenant General James Doolittle took command in January 1944, he loosened escort doctrine, with B-17Gs better able to defend themselves. P-51s and P-47s could range ahead to break up German fighter concentrations instead of being welded to the boxes. The combination of harder bombers and looser, more aggressive escorts proved punishing for the Luftwaffe. On 4th of March 1944, the first U.S. daylight raid on Berlin underscored the trend. Approximately 730 B-17s and B-24s hit the capital. The 95th Bomb Group, flying B-17Gs, lost 3 aircraft and claimed multiple attackers destroyed. Accounts frequently cite 17 claims against a defending force of roughly 200 fighters. By spring, the 8th could sustain operations that had been untenable a year earlier. The oil plan and transportation plan campaigns that demanded repeated deep strikes moved from aspiration to execution because bombers could survive long enough to make strategy work. D-Day sealed the perception shift. The 8th flew more than 2,000 bomber sorties in support of the invasion. Only 26 bombers were lost from all causes. By the summer of 1944, German fighter units faced a grim equation. American production backfilled losses. Improved defenses forced closer. Riskier attacks. Escorts were hunting freely. Tour math reflected the human side of that shift. Early in 1943, completing 25 missions felt like a coin flip. By mid-1944, 35 mission tours were increasingly common, and survival odds had more than doubled. By August, even German technical intelligence was documenting the new reality. Analyses of downed B-17Gs noted offset waist positions and effective beam coverage. What began as a modest, almost invisible change in geometry had helped transform the fortress from a porous target into a formation anchor and, more importantly, had helped bring crews home often enough to keep the pressure on. Industry. As a listening post, production lines turned combat notes into metal, glass, and survival. Production did not pause. It accelerated. At Boeing's Plant 2, some 44,000 workers pushed a moving miracle at peak. 16 B-17Gs a day. Assembly lines became listening posts. Combat notes from England and Italy came back across the Atlantic and appeared as jigs, windows, turrets, and heater controls. The weapons system evolved faster than the enemy could adapt. Autumn turned to a hard winter of tests. In October 1944, the fortress met a new threat head-on. German jets, Messerschmitt Me 262s, slashed through formations with terrifying speed. Yet gunners in the staggered, enclosed waste stations still scored damaging hits. The lesson was humbling and hopeful, even against revolutionary technology. Disciplined arcs, better sightlines, and warm hands mattered. Christmas Eve, 1944, delivered scale no planner of 1943 would have believed. Records list about 234 American bombers striking Western Germany in coordinated waves. Jet interceptions and heavy flak could not break the effort, and proportional losses stayed below the bloodletting of early 1943. survivability. Once the showstopper had become an enabler. On 3rd February 1945, nearly 1,000 B-17s went to Berlin. The Reich threw everything it had. 21 fortresses failed to return tragic. But now, within acceptable attrition levels for a campaign that aimed to finish the war. The numbers tell only part of it. The rest was crews landing with ammunition left and oxygen still flowing. The line kept running. The last B-17G rolled out on 13 April 1945, serial 44-85974, a bookend to 3 years of combat-driven adaptation, 12 days later. On 25th of April, fortresses hit Czech armaments works without loss. The modifications had done their quiet work. After the guns fell silent, analysts put language to intuition. The United States Strategic Bombing Survey concluded that the evolution of the B-17, especially defensive station improvements, materially aided air superiority. Contemporary accounting claimed roughly 20 million in modifications may have averted the loss of hundreds of aircraft valued near $190 million. And, more importantly, their trained crews, however neat the math. The human dividend was real. More men completed their tours. The legacy reached beyond one airframe. Late B-24s adopted offset waists. The B-29 moved gunners behind remote sites. Human factors thinking workspace, environmental protection. Clear fields of fire became design doctrine. Veterans never forgot the difference. At reunions, waist gunners from F models and G models compared scars and smiled grimly. A shifted window had given them room to fight. Today, a dozen B-17Gs still fly. Visitors peer at the offset waist windows and hear how combat experience became engineering, how industry turned feedback into survival, and how small changes rewrote a war's arithmetic. Sources: Craven and Kate, USSBS, 1945-47, Roger A. Freeman, Boeing Archives, AFRA, IWM Photo Archive, NARA, USAAF, Training Circulars, Boeing Plant 2, Records, AFRA, Debrief Summaries selected.